there, Mama. I'm Courtney Cecil, proud mom of two boys and an organizational culture and behavior change executive. And I'm a believer in building a movement to help the burned out, overwhelmed working moms reclaim their control and free time so that they can confidently remain in the workforce without losing their sanity or themselves. Now, let's get started. Hey y'all, I'm your host, Courtney Cecil, and welcome back to another episode of the Life Management System. So inside this episode, I'm excited to host Dr. Debra Clary. So many of you know that I've just retired from corporate as a culture exec in Fortune 50. It is part of my story and why I am sitting here with you today. But very fittingly, after completing her doctorate in human development, Debra also spent most of her career in the Fortune 50s, where she spent her time leading strategy, operations, and leadership development. It's a very impressive career, I might say, but it's also fittingly what prepared her for the work she feels most called to do. And it is in the spirit of that I have brought her on here today. So Deb, as we will lovingly call her, has most recently published her first book, The Curiosity Curve. And that book is about a topic that's very near and dear to my heart, but mainly because it's one of the most foundational ways that we can build sticky relationships, whether that be as a colleague, as a partner, or as a parent. And it's also what helps build healthy, high-performing cultures. So Deborah has spoken at many stages. Apparently, I've learned the off-Broadway stage, TEDx stages, boardrooms, and now we are fortunate to have her here with us. So Deborah, welcome to the Life Management System.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here with you.
Yeah, right back at you. Okay, so you have worked, Deb, at some pretty massive organizations, Frito-Lay, Coca-Cola, Humana, big ones, big names, three of them,
Yes.
in addition to all the other brands that I think our listeners will recognize. What differences did you see between the cultures that rewarded curiosity, knowing that that's the bread and butter of what you feel so passionate about? What do you see between the cultures that rewarded curiosity and those that unintentionally shut it down?
It really is a night and day. When you are working with a leader, you're in a culture that leaves space for your opinion, that leaves a space for your questions, and also creates an environment where it's safe to say, I don't agree with that. I mean, that's when performance happens. That's when belonging happens. That's the difference.
I love that you called out both the psychological safety and belonging, because that's also, as many people would be able to surmise, those are the tipping points for some of the performing related metrics that companies are after. When you think about things like innovation, when you think about diversity of thought, when you think about the space that, I mean, I would, not all of my listeners, but the large majority of them are working moms in some way, shape, or form, regardless of the stage in life. So belonging is so important when we are clawing our way through decades and decades and decades and centuries of a men-related workforce. So I love that you specifically called that out. So you mentioned that curiosity is one of the more underutilized powers. And I think that applies to both business and life. I mean, I saw it in the culture space. I'm sure you saw it at both the executive boardroom level and in the human development type work you did. But let's talk about the life phase for a bit. Why do you think that so many working moms in particular lose touch with their own curiosity? If you put yourself in the stage and age of a toddler, that's all they have is curiosity. And we become kind of frozen. Talk to me about why you think that might be.
Well, first off, it's not our fault. We have been taught to be incurious. So you think about toddlers, they ask 298 questions a day. And this is based on neuroscience out of London who are trying to understand brain development in children. And you say, wait a minute, a toddler can't even talk. Why does it have to ask 298 questions? Well, if they pointed at something, they considered that to be a question. As adults, we ask 5 questions a day typically. And that's might be, hey, did you make dinner reservations or are we eating in, right? So they're not necessarily curious questions. So we are taught to be incurious. When we go into elementary school, sit in your seat, be quiet, only speak when you raise your hand. Children are to be seen and not heard. And there's a lot of reasons that we teach children, ways to be respectful and ways to learn, but it almost feels like we've gone too far. So as children, we learn to be incurious. And then we grow up, we go to university, we become an engineer or an accountant or a medical doctor, and now we're rewarded for those skills. Right? And oh, by the way, we have limited time. And so again, when somebody asks us a question, if a team member comes to us, we're under stress. We probably have the answer. We just give them the answer and send them along the way. And what that happens is, you've solved one problem, but you haven't developed that employee. And so I teach women and men, in leadership roles, is that leadership is about playing the long game. And as a mother, it's about playing the long game as well, teaching your children to be able to go out into the world and make their way. And it all begins with curiosity. And at the root of curiosity is asking questions.
I think it's incredibly astute that you called out that because we feel time constrained, that is one of the reasons we also stop forgetting to pause, call a timeout, and be curious. It is truly the path of least resistance. And when I think about what that does to a relationship, when I think about what that does to the brainstorming process or the development process, to your point, or even the general exploration, it makes everything that we do transactional, as opposed to collective, as opposed to collaborative. And that transactional is the exact opposite of what I stand for and what I try to teach, whether that be inside corporate or here, because I'm a value-based believer. I believe that the more that you are grounded on what it is you value, the more you know what to prioritize. And the more you know what to prioritize, you know how to spend your time, your money, and your energy.
Yes.
And in my practice, in my core, everything goes back to those values or that purpose, for lack of a better term, which is something that you talk about in your book, Deb. So when you think about going from this point of transaction or disconnection to purpose, what would be one curiosity-based question that working moms could ask themselves right now to better ground themselves on their why, to reconnect with that?
Mm-hmm. One would be, how am I doing? It's like I'm going to check in with myself. It's like, I'm going to check in with myself. I'm going to take a breath and I'm going to sit with that question of how am I doing, and see what comes up. The other one is, where am I finding joy in my life right now? And sit with it and just kind of reflect on those deep questions.
I love that. Joy is, it's so ironic that you brought that up, because the very last thing I was doing before hopping on to record this with you is talking about that exact thing. One of my prospects I talked to yesterday told me a story that her daughter was supposed to record the 20 top people that she has fun with. Dad was number one, and she didn't even make the list. Like, he's the fun one, he's the fun parent, and yet she's the fun police. And there's just something that becomes so frozen in us when we take on this mass responsibility of child raising and having to carry the workload at home and having to carry our careers, that just end up sucking the joy right out of us.
Absolutely. And if I may, this is related to what we're talking about. When my daughters were like 10 and 8, I was reading something by Wayne Dyer, and he was talking about asking people, how do you know I love you? And so independently, I asked my daughters, the older daughter who was 10, hey, how do you know I love you? Like, what are my actions? And she said, oh, I would know you love me if you didn't show up at school, talk to my teachers, or study my homework. Like, you need to trust me that I got this. And I'm like, I would have never thought that. She's like, when you check my homework, it feels like you don't trust me. I go, got it. All right, I got it. I asked the 8-year-old, hey, babe, how do you know I love you? Oh, when you come to school and you talk with my teachers and you help me with my homework. I would have never known that had I not asked that question. So to your prospect, you said, that where her daughter had to write down 20 things that, that she enjoys doing or who she enjoys it with. It's asking her daughter, how can I show up differently for you, and how can we have fun together? I mean, ask her and see what she says.
Yeah, that is such an astute question to ask. My boys are serendipitously 8 and 10 as well right now. So
Yes.
you better believe I'm going to ask them. But how drastically different. And it also tells me that what I'm experiencing now with my 10-year-old, who has seemed to grow up overnight, is apparently very age appropriate.
Yes, and it is, you can't have the same conversation as a child as you can with your husband. You could ask different questions, but it's almost like give me an action. What is an action that it would demonstrate that? So that not having to put feeling words around it, but making it really simple. But it's very telling. And when my older daughter, was graduating from high school, it was the last day of school, and she called me. I was already driving to work, and she said, I don't want to go to school today. And I go, are you sick? She goes, no, I just don't want to go. And I said, all right. It was in the book. She was already done going, on her way to college. And so I called the admin at the front desk at the school. And I said, oh, Megan will not be at school today. And she's like, and who is this? I go, oh, I'm her mother. She goes, oh, I didn't know she had a mother. And I thought, I'm winning. Like I did it. I went all the way through school without, now I went to every concert, every ball game, but I wasn't up in her business, as she would say. And I'm like that. Like some mothers might have been like really hurt, but I'm like, yeah, I did it. I
Yeah.
made it happen. I made it happen.
Yeah, well, your responsibility as a parent is ultimately to raise kids who can be independent and function in society. And man, you did it. Like to your point, like that's a high five moment.
I know. And I've told it to other people, and they're just like, that sounds more hurtful than anything. I go, no, I felt so proud.
Yeah, well, it's also you saw her as an individual. Like you gave her the space to be able to share a part of her and what's important to her. And you honored that. That takes
Yeah. Yeah.
discipline.
Yeah, and it helped that she was a great student, right? She
Yeah.
never got into trouble, and so there was no reason to, intervene, so to speak. And yeah, so she's a well-adjusted adult with three children of her own now.
Yeah, how proud you must be. That's awesome. And I should say, very proud of your discipline to be able to,
Yeah.
again, honor who she is and what's important to her. Because that's hard. That's hard when your kids are old enough to say, you know what, Mom, I need you to sit on the sideline. This is my life. That's tough.
For sure. Yeah.
Um, okay, so let's get back to the time thing again. That I think that your acknowledgement that curiosity often doesn't exist because we don't take the time to do it. We're so busy. We're moving all the time. But often, when we think about overwhelm, like if we were to parallel these, we think about overwhelm being a time problem, a saturation problem. But you're suggesting that it's also a curiosity problem. So let's talk about that. I would love to hear your point of view on and pulling that on that thread and how getting curious about our own stress might actually lead us to a place where we have more energy and more clarity.
Yeah. So when you think about burnout, we typically arrive at that space because we are overworking, tight timelines. And at the root of that is probably fear. Oh, if I miss a timeline, or if I don't overproduce here, then something bad could happen, or I won't get that promotion. So it kind of rooted in fear. And what I do know about curiosity, that curiosity and fear cannot coexist in the brain. And so when I feel tired, burned out, or just even fearful, I ask myself a question because I know that fear and curiosity cannot coexist. And so I'm going to lead with curiosity. I ask myself a question, and then I might have to ask myself another question. But that's how I come out of it. And what's really interesting to me is that I worked, and my husband was an at-home dad, and so we had two daughters, and they have grown up into the world. They're married, have children of their own, and I watch them still managing all things children, right? So they're working full time, but they're also scheduling the nanny, or they're scheduling the swim lessons. And it's so interesting because I didn't do that. Their dad did that. but they have somehow taken that on. They have wonderful husbands. And if their husbands would, they would love to probably help out, but they're just managing it all. And I often say to them, well, have you thought about asking, Sam to do that? Well, he won't do it the way I will do it. And it's just like this thing of maybe we need to take a breath and say, maybe he could do okay at scheduling swim lessons. He's certainly capable of it.
Okay, so I want to pull on that a little bit too, because we do have a tendency to just assume that this is what, like, this chaos is just a stage of life we're in. This is status quo. Everybody else is living in the same level of crazy. This is just life with little kids. But what I hear you saying, just to call it out very plainly, is that by asking questions, it might get us to pause and say, well, does it have to feel like this? Is there a different way of doing things? Mm-hmm. So if, and you actually just said this too, in what you're just talking about, Deb, around curiosity and fear not being able to coexist, the way you dig yourself out is by asking another question and asking another question. Is there a more productive question, I guess, that we could ask relative to getting curious about different ways of doing life, or is it more just the pause that's important?
I definitely think the pause is important, but I also think it's about managing our thoughts. We have 80,000 thoughts a day, and 80% of them are the same thoughts we had the day before. So being really disciplined about the thoughts that pop into our head is critical in terms of our evolution and our transformation as a human on this planet. And it's, for me, when I get a thought and it's a negative thought, I ask myself, who would I be without this thought? Oh my gosh, I'd be really happy if I didn't have this thought. Well, is the thought true? Well, I don't know if it's true, but it might be true, but it doesn't serve me. And I go through this like mental exercise in my head to say, wait, you are 100% responsible for the thoughts that you have, and you can untangle those.
And it's so much easier said than done, though. So what would be your party trick then, Deb, for somebody, okay, they're hearing you and you're getting a head nod from them, but they're still saying, okay, I'm overwhelmed, don't really know how to dig myself out of this. Even though I recognize that my thoughts from yesterday and today are not serving me, I still don't really know what that one clarifying thing is I should get curious about in order to get me there. Is it really just acknowledging current state and desired future state, or is there something else? Is there a magic phrase or something for them to channel?
Yeah. So the first thing I would ask them is, on a scale of 1 to 5, with 5 being your greatest desire to solve this problem, where are you? And if they say, oh, I'm probably a 1 or a 2, it tend to tells me that they're not ready to tackle it. But if they say, man, I am at a 5, when you say I'm at a 5, then you realize they're really serious about wanting to make change in their life. And then that's when a real discussion can take place. When you say, all right, what would your most joyful, easygoing life look like? Now, we know that's not possible day in and day out. But if once you begin, it's called hope theory. When you begin to say, what could the future look like? And then you say, all right, if this is current state and we want to go to future state, what are the incremental moves that we need to make to get there?
I like that. I like it a lot.
Yeah, that's how I begin a conversation. And I do the same thing to myself. When I complain about something, all right, I say, all right, how willing are you to change this?
Yeah, I ask people that when I meet with prospects, that's one of the questions I ask them is essentially how ready are you to actually make the change? Because sometimes we're in a place where we know it feels yucky and we're mucking through the day, but the idea of changing feels harder or more overwhelming or just not as tempting as just continuing to muck through what we're wading through now. But by sometimes just by acknowledging, to your point, the hope theory is what you called it, right? By
Yes.
acknowledging this hope theory, it allows you to, it's such an empowering place to put yourself in and say, you know what? I'm ready. Let's do this.
Absolutely. And it's about incremental changes. It's like, what is one small change you can make this week that would help you get closer to your ideal goal, so to speak.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think the reason that most change fails or most of our goals fail is because they're too big. And someone shared this with me once, if your goals feel too big, it means the first step isn't small enough.
I love that. I really like that. I always tell my clients, like, we're working on one snack-sized habit at a time.
I love that.
And that snack size is really what leads to sustainable change, to your point. Otherwise, the leaps are too big. And when things get hard, you're going to fall right back into current state.
I think it's also really helpful if you have, and this sounds kind of formal, but like an accountability partner. You have someone that you say, I'm really wanting to make this change. If you see me doing it, would you, affirm it? Or if you see me off track, would you be willing to say something to me? You got to have that, agreement with them. But real change can happen when you do it in small bites, and you also have somebody that's supporting you.
Yeah. Amen. That is something that I underestimated would be so important in working with my clients. And the Strengths Finders, discipline is my number one, or two. It's either that or achiever, depends on the day. So it just comes so organically to me. But that's the one thing that a lot of my clients would get excited about, is like, no, I know that I need this, and I know I need somebody that I'm having to report out to every week to make sure it happens. And I get it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, so last question for you before we get on to the lightning round questions. Especially as a mom and a grandmother and a woman in a world and at a time that many women did not work or certainly did not reach the heights that you did in your career, Deb. So I want to talk about generational patterns, and how there are some things, whether that be the way that we parent, that have to change because society's changed or because the environment has changed, or there be different ways we need to get work done because of the same things. Society's changed, the way that we work changed, that sort of thing. How can we use and leverage curiosity as a way to, part of it's like a pattern interrupt of those generational norms, also like create some empathy across generations? What would you recommend we either bring to the table or ask ourselves or ask of others to disrupt some of the either misconceptions or the assumptions that because I did it this way, we must do it that way, that tend to exist between different generations?
Yeah, and I'm reminded by a Harvard professor. His name is Robert Keegan. And one of the things that he writes about is this, we are brought up with beliefs. So we all come into the world and we have parents or teachers, people around us that teach us values and beliefs. And they're simply they're passing along their values and beliefs. And what he encourages people to do is first start with, why do I hold this belief? And does it still serve me? Right. So, for an example, some people are raised as their parents might have been Republican or Democratic, and they come up through that thinking that that is the best party for them. And this is a simple thing, and saying, wait, does it still support my belief? And as adults, we can change our beliefs. So this thing is about challenge your values and challenging your beliefs. And I think it's really powerful when you challenge your values and you say, no, I definitely hold this value. And you say, that's great. Hold on to it. Right.
Yeah.
And so one is, everything starts with self and reflecting on ourselves. And then the next thing is about, am I surrounded by people that are supporting my values? And that includes the workplace. Right? If you find yourself in a toxic workplace, or if it's a boss, I many times I said, I think I can outlive my boss, meaning I'm going to be around longer than they're going to be in terms of their position. And I would just kept doing good work, because I said one day she's going to be found out and they're going to make a change, and it would happen. I just got to show up, do a good work. Now, if I thought, oh my gosh, I'm going to have to work for her for a decade, I wouldn't have been able to do it. So this sense of, am I in the right place with my values, and can I do my best work in this culture? And that's the work you do, is what is the best culture?
Yeah, I'm so just tickled that you ended up taking it back there. I think that was the way that we were supposed to wrap up this segment because it really is my core belief that, to your point, Deb, that when you get grounded on what you value, it can answer everything you need. It can help solve for all the indecision that you have, the way that you should be aligning your entire life, the way that you show up for others. It's paramount to everything. Okay, so let's move on to the lightning round questions that I ask every guest that I host. The first for you, Deb, what is your go-to stress busting activity?
Breathing.
Ooh, yeah, that's something I underestimated for many years, and now I'm a big believer.
Mhm.
Okay, what is your last book or podcast that you really loved?
The work I really love and I'm really leaning into is Atomic Habits. So we
Mm.
talked a lot about habits and making incremental changes. And I love that book for that reason. And I'm rereading it to remind myself.
Yeah, James Clear is one of my favorite people to follow and to consume. I've read that book at least 3 times. Okay, so last one, if you could wave a magic wand, what task would you eliminate forever?
Anything administratively,
Calendar, bills,
mostly,
expenses.
yeah, expenses, invoicing, that type of
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah.
I know it's necessary, but yeah,
It's not your highest and best use. That's
yes.
I teach people to when it comes time to figure out what you need to delegate, regardless if you're outsourcing it or if you're giving it away to a partner or a kid, figure out what's your highest and best use and stick to that stuff and get rid of the others. And Deb, that's not your highest and best use. You are in your roles for a reason. Okay, very last question. How do people reach you? And particularly just maybe a little cliff notes about your book.
Yeah, so you can reach me on my website, which is just my name. So www.debraclary.com. And in there is my an opportunity to set up a calendar meeting with us and we can have a quick chat if you'd like to connect. Otherwise, you can see great resources on my website. And also, you'll see on there how you could order my book called The Curiosity Curve. And the Curiosity Curve is everything we've talked about today. It's a framework on how to think about how to lead in a very different way. And leading, I mean, lead yourself, lead your family, lead your organization.
I love that you included all of those hats that we wear. Well, Deb, thank you for being here. Friends, I'm going to link that stuff in the show notes. Most particularly, go out and support Deb, get her book. Thanks for tuning in. And if nobody's told you lately, you're doing a great job. You've got this, Mama. Hey, friend, thanks for tuning in. Add the Life Management System podcast to your favorites so you don't miss my practical, snack sized tips to help you manage the mental load and create a life that works for you. If we're not yet connected on Instagram, come say hi at Working Moms Movement for daily inspiration. And if this is your third or 10th time listening, it's time you bless the small business. Share this episode with another working mom in the thick of it and take 30 seconds to rate and review. It helps more than you know. And if you're ready to go from surviving to thriving and make your day to day actually sustainable, email me at Courtney@workingmomsmovement.com. Mention this podcast for 25% off my coaching services. I also speak and host workshops for organizations that want to support working parents from the inside out. Reach out if you think yours is ready. This has been the Life Management System, your shortcut to less chaos and more calm. And here's your reminder to keep managing your life instead of letting it manage you.